August 21st. Itenjobai Sisharar. Tenaru River. Guadalcanal. The jungle is still black with night when Private First Class Daniel Danny Russo feels the mud tremble beneath him. It's subtle at first, a faint vibration, like distant thunder swallowed by the canopy. But then he hears it, the rhythmic chant of men advancing in the dark. Tenoheka, Banzai. He presses his cheek harder against the warm receiver of his rifle, the new M1 Garand he was issued weeks earlier. The weapon, some of the older Marines still call that fancy self-loader. Russo's breath fogs in the heavy air. Sweat drips down his spine, despite the cold damp of the riverbank. A flare hisses skyward. For a brief second the jungle ignites in white light. And that's when he sees them, hundreds of Japanese soldiers rushing across the sandbar. Bayonets glinting. Uniforms soaked from crossing the river. Their commander, Captain Hiroshi Watanabe of the Ichiki Detachment, charges at the front, sword raised. Believing the Americans still rely on slow bolt-action rifles, Watanabe had drilled it into his men before the attack. The American rifle is the Springfield. Bolt, action. 1 shot at a time. You will close the distance. You will overwhelm them. But Watanabe doesn't know what waits in the shadows ahead. Russo tightens his grip on the Garand's wooden stock. He exhales and pulls the trigger. Crack. The first 30-06 round punches through the chest of a running soldier. But there's no pause, no bolt to lift. No chamber to cycle. Russo fires again. And again. And again. Crack. 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 8 rounds tear through the humid night, in a blistering, metronomic rhythm. To the Japanese soldiers, it sounds impossible, like several rifles being fired by one man. The muzzle flash strobes the riverbank, illuminating Russo's steady stance. His thumb brushing the warm steel as the M1 cycles itself with mechanical certainty, across the river. Captain Watanabe blinks in disbelief. Yido Hoten automatic fire, but it isn't automatic. It's simply faster, far faster, than anything his men have trained to fight. His Arisaka Type 99 clatters as he chambered a round. For every shot he fires, the Marines lose 6. The American line erupts, brown uniforms rising from the trenches. Garands leveled. Their rifles thunder so rapidly that Japanese officers later write they believed the Marines had hidden machine guns along the river. Watanabe shouts for his men to charge harder, to close the distance before the Americans can cycle their bolts. But the distance is no longer their ally. The Garands fire without interruption. Every Marine seems to hold the firepower of 2. By the time the sun edges over the tree line, the river runs red around the bodies. The Ichiki Detachment, one of Japan's most confident assault units, lies shattered. Torn apart not just by American resolve, but by a rifle they had never imagined existed. Russo slumps against a mangrove trunk, hands trembling, thumbs still smarting from the kick of the op rod. He reloads with a metallic ping as the empty clip ejects and arcs into the mud. He stares down the long line of spent casings glittering at his feet. Breathing hard, his sergeant pats his helmet. Get used to it, kid. That rifle of yours, it's gonna change this whole damn war. Behind the American lines, captured Japanese notes already hint at confusion. Some describe the Marines firing without pause. Others sketch crude diagrams of the Garand's gas system. Unable to believe a standard infantry rifle could shoot that fast and stay that accurate. But this was only the first encounter. Japan had not yet fully grasped what the M1 Garand meant for the Pacific. For now, the jungle falls silent again, except for the soft clatter of Marines reloading rifles that the enemy still struggles to comprehend. The ocean is boiling. Marines clutch the sides of their Higgins boats as geysers of coral, water, and shrapnel erupt around them. The Japanese defenders on Baitio have zeroed their artillery onto the lagoon. Every few seconds, a plume of white spray rises like a fist, smashing another landing craft to pieces. Corporal Danny Russo, older now. Harder. no longer the wide-eyed kid from the Tenaru River, wipes sea salt from the rear sight of his M1 Garand. His uniform clings to his skin. The metallic tang of cordite mixes with ocean wind. The approaching shoreline glows with the red of tracer fire, streaking low and fast across the waves. A corporal beside him shouts over the engine, 2 minutes. When that ramp drops, move. Russo nods but doesn't answer. He's listening. The sounds of battle are different now, sharper, louder, more chaotic than Guadalcanal. He hears the chatter of Japanese Nambu machine guns, the thump of mortars, and behind it all, his own heartbeat. And somewhere in the storm of noise, he hears the metallic rhythm of Garands firing from the earlier wave that made it ashore. Crack, 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 crack. It's not frantic. It's controlled, deliberate, almost like someone tapping a steel hammer against the air itself. But the Japanese defenders hear something else. On the seawall above, Lieutenant Masayuki Harada of the Special Naval Landing Forces peers through a narrow firing slit inside a reinforced blockhouse. He has never forgotten the reports from Guadalcanal stories of Americans using strange, self-firing rifles that could unleash bullets faster than trained riflemen, but Japanese intelligence had dismissed those accounts as exaggeration. Harada squints at the approaching second wave. Through smoke and heat distortion, he sees Marines bracing for impact. Rifles held ready. He raises his binoculars. And then, the ramp drops. The first Marine off the boat splashes into chest-deep water. A round catches him before he can take 3 steps. The second man dives behind the wreck of another craft. Harada smirks. The shallow waters and tidal miscalculation have trapped the Americans in the killing zone. But then he sees it again, that same impossible sight that had haunted the after-action notes from Ichiki's staff officers. A Marine rises from the water behind a half-sunk skiff. He levels his Garand. Crack. One of Harada's gunners collapses. Crack, crack. 2 more. The Marine doesn't pause, doesn't manipulate a bolt, doesn't shift his stance. Harada's eyes widen. Mada ugoku no ka. They can still fire that fast, even soaked. The Garand's action cycles flawlessly despite the salt water, sand, and chaos. That is the true shock for Harada, not just the speed, but the reliability. Japanese rifles, when wet, sometimes misfire. The Americans' semi-auto rifles fire as if they belong in a machine shop. Not a battlefield. More Marines fire from the surf, forming hasty firing lines behind broken equipment. Every shot is placed with terrifying speed. Harada barks orders, desperate to suppress them. But the Garand's cadence breaks the momentum of his counterfire. Russo hears a bullet whiz past his ear as he dives behind a chunk of coral. He slams in a fresh 8-round clip. Ping. He pops up. Fires twice. 2 silhouettes drop near a bunker slit. He moves positions. Water sloshing around his waist. A young Marine next to him shouts, "Damn it." They're dug in deep. Russo fires again, sweeping his rifle toward the bunker mouth. We'll dig him out. 1 shot at a time. But it isn't 1 shot, not anymore. The Garand lets the Marines keep firing. Keep pressing. Keep advancing even when pinned in deadly open ground. Inside the bunker, Harada watches another wave of Marines push forward, using only moments of cover to fire rapid, precise volleys. He's seen enough. The reports from Guadalcanal were not exaggerations, they were understatements. Americans, he mutters, lowering his binoculars, fight with rifles like light machine guns. The realization spreads through his bunker like a cold current. The Imperial soldiers who once believed they could close distance and overwhelm American firepower now face an enemy whose standard infantry rifle doubles their output and maintains accuracy in conditions that would cripple most weapons. Outside, Russo pushes forward, Garand warm in his hands, barrel steaming in the island heat. The rapid fire of his rifle merges with the roar of battle as Marines pour onto the beach. Tarawa is far from won, but for the Japanese defenders, the myth of American weak firepower dies right here on the lagoon's edge, buried under the thunder of the M1 Garand. The air inland is thicker, Hotter, almost suffocating. Baitio is barely 2 square kilometers of volcanic grit and shattered palms. But it feels like a furnace. The ground trembles under the constant concussion of naval shells landing farther down the island. Smoke rolls low. Clinging to the earth like a living creature, Corporal Danny Russo wipes grime from his face with the back of his hand. His ears ring. Vision blurred around the edges. Hands raw from gripping his Garand through salt water and blood. He pushes forward with what remains of his platoon. Weaving between burned-out tanks and bodies half buried in black sand. Ahead, a row of bunkers looms like jagged teeth, fortified positions of the special naval landing forces that have held out for hours despite bombardment. Sergeant Fuller crouches beside Russo behind a splintered coconut log. Same plan. Fuller growls. You fire. We move. Behind him, 2 Marines sprint forward. Inside the bunker, Lieutenant Harada flinches at the violent rhythm striking the exterior. He has been in combat since Shanghai and has faced everything from British Enfields to Soviet Mosins, all slow. Predictable bolt actions. He knows their tempo, their cadence, their weaknesses. This is something else entirely. He had predicted American Marines would advance cautiously, stopping to reload after every careful shot. Instead, he sees them firing on the move, firing under pressure, firing so fast it resembles the Type 96 light machine gun but with greater accuracy. Harada turns to his surviving men. Do not rise to shoot. They will kill you before you bolt your rifle. But one frightened conscript disobeys. He pops up, chambers around, and aims, but Russo's shot lands first, knocking him backward into the sand before he can pull the trigger. Harada feels a knot form in his chest. So it's true, he thinks. Their rifles multiply their strength. Back outside, Russo senses movement near a collapsed trench and shifts his rifle with instinctive precision. He squeezes the trigger, the Garand bucks in his hands, and another foe drops. The Marines around him advance at a steady pace, almost all of them firing semi-automatic rifles. Their line looks impossibly strong for such a thin force. A Japanese machine gun barks from a concealed nest. Russo and his squad drop instantly, sand exploding inches from their helmets. Russo Fuller shouts, "Pin them down." Move, Fuller orders. Marines surge toward the bunker. A flamethrower team rushes past Russo, the operator nodding once before unleashing a roaring jet of fire into the pillbox. The heat washes over Russo like opening an oven door. He presses his shoulder against a bit of rubble. Panting, his rifle smokes in his hands. Another Marine, Private Ellis, slides beside him. Your rifle's running like a sewing machine. Corporal. Russo grins weakly. Yeah, just don't tell her that. She'll get cocky. Ellis laughs, a brief, ragged sound in the chaos. Then, a sharp whistle cuts across the battlefield. Fuller signals them forward again. Next bunker move. Russo rises, reloading with a crisp, metallic ping as the empty clip flips through the air. He slams in a fresh one and charges. The ground trembles under his boots as he and the others rush across a yard of open sand, then another, until they finally crash behind a fallen tree trunk. Inside this next bunker, Lieutenant Harada realizes the Americans aren't stalling. They aren't hesitating after each volley. They are advancing while firing a tactic nearly impossible with bolt-action rifles. He watches in disbelief as Russo and his squad leapfrog toward his position, rifles cracking in overlapping rhythms. Each Marine covers the next. Each shot arrives half a heartbeat after the last. Harada grips the hilt of his sword not out of bravery, but out of grim recognition. Kore wa senso, no atarashi jidai da. This is a new age of warfare. For the first time, he truly understands Japan's infantry doctrine built on speed, spirit, and bayonet charges is colliding headlong with a modern army whose firepower is unlike anything the Imperial forces have ever faced. And the rifle in Danny Russo's hands is the dividing line between centuries of tradition and the mechanized reality of 20th century war. Russo raises his Garand again. The rifle roars. The bunker shakes. And the ancient art of the bayonet rush dies beneath the thunder of American steel. The sun climbs higher, turning the sky into a searing white dome. The heat rising off the sand distorts everything. Palm stumps ripple like ghosts. Metal warps the air above it, and the scent of burned flesh hangs heavy over the battlefield. Exhaustion settles on the Marines like a second uniform. Stiff and suffocating, Corporal Danny Russo adjusts his helmet strap with shaky fingers. He's running on instinct now, every movement driven by training, et muscle memory, and the stubborn will that has carried him across 2 islands and more firefights than he can count. Ahead, the western ridge of Badio bristles with the last major cluster of Japanese defenders, bunkers carved into the coral, reinforced with coconut logs, connected by tunnels, and somewhere inside that labyrinth waits Lieutenant Harada, clutching his sword, refusing to accept defeat. Russo's platoon forms a staggered line behind a shattered anti-aircraft gun. Sergeant Fuller Crush, scanning the ridge. They're getting desperate. Expect a banzai push. Russo wipes soot from the front sight of his Garand. Let Eng come. Fuller gives him a knowing look, 1 part approval, 1 part concern. The ridge is silent for a long moment. No movement. No shots. Then, faintly at first, Russo hears a sound that makes the hairs on his neck rise, the rhythmic stomp of feet pounding coral. An angry roar builds, echoing through the tunnels like the growl of some ancient beast. The Japanese are coming. A flare arcs skyward, illuminating a scene that feels ripped from another century. Dodsons know. Scores of Japanese soldiers burst from the trenches and tunnels. Some wear bandages soaked with blood. Others grip Arisaka rifles with fixed bayonets. A few hold Type 96 light machine guns, carried not to fire, but to swing like clubs in a final frenzy of violence. Their leader, Lieutenant Harada, emerges last, sword raised high. His voice cuts through the chaos. Tenno Haika Banzai. The ridge erupts in a violent human wave. Russo's breath steadies. His heartbeat slows. He plants his boots, shoulders his Garand, and pulls the trigger. Crack. The first soldier falls. Russo shifts. Aim fires again. Crack, crack, crack. 4 more drop. The rifle bucks against his shoulder, metal steaming in the heat. He feels the gas-operated action cycling smoothly, almost smoothly enough to forget the chaos around him. Beside him, Marines unleash disciplined volleys. Their rifles hammer in relentless rhythm. 8 shots. Reload. 8 more. There is no pause. No bottleneck. The Japanese charge falters, but Harada pushes forward, shouting desperately, "Move faster, close the distance." Their rifles cannot fire forever, but the truth hits him as hard as any bullet. They can fire, and they keep firing. His men collapse long before they reach bayonet range. Every step forward becomes a gamble against a wall of bullets. The Garand's cadence a mechanical enarmament. Unstoppable heartbeat shreds the charge before it ever becomes a melee. Russo hears the telltale click of an empty chamber. Ping. The clip ejects, spinning brightly through the smoke. In the half-second lull, 3 Japanese soldiers rush him. Bayonets flashing, Russo drops to 1 knee, slams a new clip home, and fires point blank. 1 falls. Another staggers, clutching his throat. A third dives behind a log only to be cut down by a Marine farther down the line. The charge disintegrates. Bodies pile across the coral. The roar becomes a whimper. And then silence. Harada stands alone, sword trembling in his grip. His uniform is torn, face streaked with ash, eyes blazing with equal parts fury and heartbreak. He steps forward 1 slow, determined stride. Russo raises his Garand, but hesitates for a fraction of a second. He sees not a monster, but a man carrying the weight of a doctrine older than the country that issued his sword. Harada stops 10 yards away, lowering his weapon. For the first time, he speaks softly not to his men, but to the enemy who has outpaced him, outgunned him, and outlived him. America has changed the battlefield. With a rifle. He closes his eyes. Russo fires a single round. The lieutenant crumples, sword slipping from his hand and clattering against the coral with a sound that seems impossibly small after so much violence. The ridge falls quiet. Around Russo, Marines slowly rise from cover, breathing hard. Rifles smoking. Helmets dented. Sleeves torn. They look at one another with the shared understanding that something fundamental has just ended, not just a charge, not just a battle, but an entire way of fighting. The age of bolt-action dominance, the age of bayonet rushes, the age of closing distance as a tactic, all of it dies here. On a strip of sand less than a mile long, and the M1 Garand heavy, gas-operated, semi-automatic has buried the old world beneath its steel-clad thunder. Russo wipes sweat from his brow, slings his rifle, and stares into the fading smoke. Another island secured. Another lesson written in blood. The battle is over. Baitio, once a fortress, the Japanese boasted, could not be taken in 100 years, now lies silent, except for the hiss of smoldering bunkers and the distant rumble of bulldozers clearing debris. Coconut palms stand like blackened skeletons against the sky. The air reeks of burnt fuel, salt water, and the unmistakable metallic sting of blood. Corporal Danny Russo sits on a broken section of seawall. Helmet off. Fingers absently tracing the serrations of his Garand's operating rod. His hands are still trembling. Not from fear now, but from the sheer physical strain of firing hundreds of rounds over the past several days. Spent casings glitter around his boots like brass seashells. Across the beach, Marines gather canteens, reload belts, wrap bandages. Some stare blankly at the horizon. Others check weapons even though the danger has passed. They look older now, every one of them, as if an entire year has passed in 3 days. A Navy corpsman walks by and gives Russo a nod. You still in one piece? Corporal. Russo shrugs. Mostly. The corpsman's gaze drops to the rifle. That thing saved a hell of a lot of men. Russo looks down at the weapon resting across his knees. He doesn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. More like grateful, and maybe even humbled. A shadow falls over him. Sergeant Fuller steps up, dropping a canteen beside him. You did good on that ridge. Russo takes a long drink. Didn't feel good. Fuller nods. War rarely does. A long silence hangs between them, broken only by distant waves slapping the ruined pier. Finally, Fuller kneels, lowering his voice. You know what the intel boys found in the bunkers? Russo shakes his head, reports. Fuller says, Japanese field notes, diagrams, sketches of our rifles. They were trying to figure out how the hell we were firing so fast. Some officers thought we were using hidden machine guns. Some wrote it was impossible for one man to shoot that quickly. Russo stares at the sand. They didn't know about the Garand. No. Fuller says softly. They didn't. Not until it was too late. He stands and dusts off his trousers. Get some rest. We'll be shipping out soon. Russo watches him walk away, then lifts the Garand to eye level. He examines the scratches along the stock, the soot darkening the gas cylinder, the faint heat shimmer still rising off the barrel. He remembers firing until his shoulder throbbed. He remembers the rhythm, a relentless heartbeat of American steel that drowned out the jungle, the ocean, the fear. He remembers Harada's final words. America has changed the battlefield. With a rifle. Russo exhales slowly. He knows the lieutenant wasn't wrong. Later that evening, the sun sets over Baitio in shades of orange and blood red. Marines gather near the center of the island, where a Japanese command bunker has been cleared. Intelligence teams sift through crates and documents, stacking papers illuminated by lanterns. A young Marine runner sprints toward them with an armful of new finds diaries, tactical manuals, folded maps. One lieutenant opens a notebook written in slanted Japanese kanji. Inside, A section is underlined heavily, as if the writer wanted to warn every soldier who followed him. The translated line reads, "The American rifle fires without pause. One man has the strength of two." Another note, found beside a dead officer, is even more direct. "We cannot charge their line. We die before we reach them." The intelligence lieutenant closes the notebook. Expression grim. This changes everything. He murmurs. Night falls over Tarawa. Russo lies on his back in a shallow foxhole, staring at the stars. His Garand rests beside him, cleaned, but still warm to the touch. He can smell the oil on its bolt, the faint sweetness of spent powder still trapped in the wood grain. He thinks of Guadalcanal the first time he fired the rifle in anger. He thinks of Tarawa, where he felt firsthand what it means to hold a weapon that shapes the fate of a battle. The M1 Garand isn't perfect. It's heavy. It kicks like a mule. And when that clip ejects with its sharp ping, every man nearby knows you're empty. But it fires, and fires, and fires. Rain begins to fall. Light and cool. Russo closes his eyes, letting it soak into his face, mixing with the grime. Tomorrow, they'll ship out. Another island, another ridge, another fight. But tonight, just for a moment, he rests in the quiet, knowing the rifle beside him has earned its reputation. And knowing the enemy now fears it, the Garand hasn't just doubled American firepower, it has doubled their chance to survive.